Greetings, Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Arrow episode review right here on Otaku Assemble Weekly. And as always, here to bring you the latest in this week's Arrow episode review. And this is my review of Season 4, Episode 17, entitled Beacon of Hope. Get it? Beacon. I just made a bee pun. How clever am I? Seriously though, this episode is laid with bee puns. We get it. We're dealing with robotic bees. Let's move on. So, general thoughts on this week's episode. This episode was a hit or miss. There were a couple of things I thought the episode did really well, and some things I thought it did downright terrible. I'll get into further detail with that later in this review. So first off, let's start with what the episode did right, what they did well. Off top, the villain. This week we get the return of Brie Larvan, not to be confused with the actress Brie Larson, but Brie Larvan, the crazy bee lady that we got in last season of Flash when Felicity crossovered onto that series. And I think she worked out really well in this episode because, number one, her motive, it's personal. It's about her. You know, we find out that apparently she is suffering from a tumor in her spine that once it's surgically removed, she will be paralyzed from the waist down. So she targets Palmer Tech, specifically Felicity, in order to get the chip that Felicity was implanted with that allows her to walk again. So I thought that was pretty good because, number one, the whole idea of Felicity getting that chip implanted in her spine so that she could walk again, you could have very well taken that as, oh, the writers just came up with this thing. You know, it's like you wrote Felicity suffering this crucial injury, and she could have very well spent the rest of the series in a wheelchair, but then you come up with this idea so that she can walk again like normal, right? And you would think that, oh, well, the writers, we had to suffer some type of, major hit. The team had to suffer some kind of tragedy, even though they didn't kill off Felicity like we always thought, like we were all thinking at the time. But it's like the team needed a major hit, but we couldn't stay, that change to the status quo, it couldn't stand. So we had to come up with some creative way so that she could walk again. And you would think that that was a one note, okay, bam, we caused the problem, we fixed the problem, and now we're moving on. No, where they're bringing it back into relevance, and they're making it the whole objective of an entire villain plot. That I thought was pretty clever. I dug that. I liked it. And so once again, going back to Larvan, the fact that her motive is personal, I can kind of see why she's doing what she's doing more so than some other villains. Alright, now, what they didn't get right in terms with Larvan is, once again, the bee puns. And here's the thing. It is much better done when you're able to make puns seem authentic to a character, when you're able to write them as part of that character's vernacular where that's just what they do. Yes, they are still puns, but they come off much less intentional. An example of what I mean. For some of you all who may have read Batman comics once, especially with the Riddler, some writers have actually written Edward Nygma where he speaks in riddles. It's part of his vernacular, and it's not just so much a gimmick. It's not this theatrical performance that he's putting on. He actually talks this way. If they would have used that same logic to Larvan, where she makes bee puns, but it's actually part of the way she speaks. Smallville did this a lot too with some of its characters. But what I'm saying is, when you make it seem more real, like the character is actually saying that, and you're not just trying to go for a punchline, the puns don't come across as so much intentional as clever. That's the point I'm trying to bring. Okay, so let's see what else worked in the episode too. This episode, we finally got Curtis, Mr. Terrific. We finally got him part of Team Arrow in this episode. That I thought worked pretty well. I liked that they immediately went with the whole, oh, it's the outsider who is sort of playing this up and kind of making it this, this spectacle, like, oh my goodness, I'm part of a superhero team. How fantastic this is. And of course that there's that dichotomy between him and Oliver, because Oliver is on the full-blown extent of, no, this is real life and death situations. It isn't a game. And so the fact that that was brought up, granted, it had to do with, Oliver and him trying to cope with the breakup and whatnot. But I like that it was at least established, because let's face it, if a civilian were to find themselves on Team Arrow, that's the sort of reaction you would expect. And the fact that it was Curtis, him being as big of a geek as he already is, that just sort of made sense. But I also like the way in which it was orchestrated, because they managed to split up Felicity and Curtis. They managed to put Felicity in a position where she couldn't actually do what she normally would if she was still part of Team Arrow. And so we needed a surrogate. We needed somebody to step in and fill that void. And Curtis is the perfect pick. Now, I'm curious as to whether or not Curtis will be taking Felicity's place on the team. At least for the next couple of episodes, until Felicity finally gets over her shit and comes back to the team. I think it would be cool, but I'm also a little bit hesitant to say that they'll take that route, just because at the end of the episode, we already saw how Curtis sort of being involved with Team Arrow, how that can potentially drive a wedge between him and his husband. So it's just a matter of time. Now, granted, who knows? That scene could be foreshadowing the inevitable old superhero dating a civilian and all the problems that brings up. And we could end up be doing some more relationship type shit. So it's just a matter of time. We'll see. Now, the things this episode just did god awful. So I already brought up the bee puns. Let's talk about pop culture references. Okay, first and foremost, I appreciate that this show has gone out of its way to bring more levity into the series, because let's face it, Arrow needed it. Especially after last season, how dark and grim things were, it needed some levity. But here's the thing. This episode had a few too many pop culture references, to the point where, once again, just like going off of the bee puns, we get it. If these references, like the way they do it in Flash, if they were more authentic, if they were more part of characters' vernacular, we would, it wouldn't feel like you're just trying to deliver a punchline. The most awkward one, when Captain Lance threw out an Independence Day reference, I'm like, seriously? Now, the funny punchline was when he said, what, I can't watch movies too. See, that was a good punchline. But like Curtis dropping a pop culture reference every other sentence, just too many for one episode. The other thing I'm going to throw in there, we understand the title of the episode is called Beacon of Hope. And yes, you might want to throw that in maybe once or twice in the dialogue of your episode. 6 times. 6 times Beacon of Hope was dropped in the episode's dialogue. 6 times. Yes, it was 6 times. I was counting. That's a little overkill. We understand. We get it. We got the message the first time around you said it. Maybe you want to repeat it once just to follow up on it. But we got the gist. Okay, let's move on. Okay, the robotic bees, the bees turning themselves into a robot, that I actually thought was pretty cool. I didn't see that one coming. I thought that was pretty cool. Where I think the idea fell short, though, is consider this. What makes these robotic bees so formidable? The fact that they're small targets, the fact that they are, swarms at a time, they're not easily destroyable. Okay, here's the thing. That's cool. But the second you put these things into a hulking body like this giant robot behind me, okay, now it's like, okay, so the bees, they form this construct, and all right, now you can actually fight it with brute force. But doesn't that sort of take some of the fear of away from the bees? Because now we have this huge, giant, single target. And here's the other thing too. Once again, I like the idea. I just don't think that it was explored enough, because if the bees could create this giant robotic figure, what other constructs could they make? The fact that we didn't get any other type of constructs, that's where I felt like the idea sort of, went south. So that whole thing, bit of a letdown. Hopefully, though, because Larvan, they haven't killed her off, so they could always bring her back. And maybe by that time, we will start to see what I just mentioned. All right. And final note I'm going to discuss about the episode was all the stuff with Damien Darhk. Damien Darhk in bars. I dug everything that was happening in his little storyline. Granted, I don't think we got enough screen time with him. That pretty much wraps up all my thoughts on this week's episode of Arrow. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. And in the comments below, leave your thoughts on this week's episode, as well as let me know what some of you guys are expecting for next week's episode. Next week seems to be the big episode when we finally get the death. The big death that they have been teasing us with all season long. It appears that that's going to take place next episode. There are plenty of theories online. You know, last week I talked about how potentially it could be Laurel. I'm still not entirely on boat with that thing. I am still thinking it's either going to be Quentin or it might even be Diggle himself. So, especially if his brother's involved. See, that's the other big thing too. Because I was like, man, I could see it being John. I was like, but I don't know exactly how we would get to that point. And now that we know that Andy's going to be involved to some degree, I could see John getting screwed over and him being the one to get to get capped. So once again, in the comments below, let me know who do you guys think is going to bite the bullet in next week's episode. Also, if you like this review, please feel free to thumb it up. Feel free to share this review. And if you want the latest OAW reviews, please make sure you subscribe to the OAW YouTube channel annotation above it. So, join me tomorrow. Legends of Tomorrow returns tomorrow. I will be doing my first Legends of Tomorrow review. That'll be up tomorrow. And then Friday, my Vikings episode review will be out. So, with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off. And until next time, peace.